Today I'm talking about Aragorn, and specifically about the central task at the heart of his character arc. His incredibly straightforward mission, the reason why he joined the Fellowship, his much easier said than done quest to return the sword that was broken to the City of Kings. Maya Govan and Melanine, and welcome to another episode of Tolkien Untangled. So, Aragorn appears in 31 chapters of The Lord of the Rings. In his first chapter, we are introduced to a ranger called Strider, and in his last one we bid farewell to a king called Elessar. And in every single one of the 29 in between, there is, among, other things, a central narrative through line, a core desire that lies at the heart of Aragorn's character. In one way or another, everything he does between entering the Lord of the Rings and departing it is in some way tied up with his quest to first reforge the shards of Narsil, the blade of his mighty ancestor Elendil, and then to carry the remade sword into the south, and to return it to the City of Kings, to Minas Tirith. But I guess the very first thing to say about all this is that, of course, that's not at all how it goes in Peter Jackson's films. The point of this video is not to bash those movies. What I want to do instead is simply highlight an enormously important detail, which is absolutely vital in understanding Tolkien's Aragorn, and his motives, and his actions, and his role in the story, that Peter Jackson's films maybe allude to, but certainly don't, meaningfully explore. Removing Andúril from Aragorn's story until an hour and 40 minutes into the final film was not only completely unnecessary, I think, but also a severe detriment to the character. It removes a lot of the backbone of what Aragorn's all about. Anyway, as I say, this is not a video criticizing movie Aragorn, so let's focus instead on what Tolkien wrote, and dive into one of the most interesting facets on one of the most interesting characters in the entire Lord of the Rings. So, we first meet a ranger called Strider in the Sign of the Prancing Pony chapter, but it's in the next chapter that we learn his true name is Aragorn, and that he carries a broken sword. In that chapter, we are treated to this iconic poem in a letter from Gandalf. From the ashes a fire shall be woken, a light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be the blade that was broken, the crownless again shall be king. And it's when Aragorn reveals his broken blade to the hobbits that they begin to trust he might be the friend that Gandalf was referring to in his letter. This is the moment when the heir of Isildur and his broken sword enter into the tale of the Lord of the Rings. But, of course, it's not the beginning of Aragorn's relationship with said sword. He was first bestowed the shards of Narsil by his foster father Elrond when he came to manhood at the age of 20. So that's 67 years before he meets the hobbits at the Prancing Pony. Now, 3,000 years before that, the sword Narsil belonged to Elendil, who ruled as the High King of the United Kingdoms of the Dunedain, Arnor in the north and Gondor in the south. When Elendil died, Narsil broke beneath him, and his son, Isildur, used that broken blade to cut the ring from Sauron's finger and bring a final end to the wars of the Second Age. But then Isildur died too, and the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor split, each one ruled by separate kings. Down in Gondor, the kingdom endured, but the line of kings failed. In Arnor, it was the other way around. The kingdom fell to the Witch King of Angmar, but the line of kings did not. In the north, Isildur's right to rule was inherited from father to son in an unbroken line for millennia. The Dunedain of Arnor became known only as the Rangers of the North, but for over 1,000 years, the chieftains of those rangers kept secret from the servants of Sauron that they are the heirs of Isildur, the heirs of the guy who took him down the last time. For the first 87 years of his life, Aragorn's true identity has been kept secret from all save his closest friends and family. Just like in the lifetimes of his ancestors, the heirlooms of the Dunedain have remained concealed. The broken sword has remained broken. But that status quo that endured for millennia was always destined to change. One day, Isildur's bane is gonna be revealed. The One Ring is gonna be brought to light, and the long years of secrecy are gonna come to an end. Which Aragorn has known for most of his life. Back when he was only 20, on the same day that Elrond bestowed him the broken sword, Elrond also prophesied, "A great doom awaits you, either to rise above the height of all your fathers since the days of Elendil, or to fall into darkness with all that is left of your kin." One way or another, Aragorn's known since the day he came of age that the line of the chieftains of the North is gonna end with him. Perhaps in extinction, or perhaps because he will rise above his chieftain ancestors and to come into his inheritance as the High King of all Dunedain in the North and South, just like Elendil was, and like Isildur was. So, that's where Aragorn's mind is at when he meets the hobbits in the Prancing Pony, in the moment when the Ring-bearer agrees to take the heir of Isildur as his guide to Rivendell, where Aragorn knows Isildur's bane is finally going to come to light. This is the moment when the first domino falls, when Aragorn realizes the time is now. He has to guide the hobbits to Rivendell, because the broken sword has to be reforged there, and he has to carry it into the south to bring hope back to the Dunedain of Gondor, and to do war with Mordor. Which is, of course, exactly what he does. Aragorn successfully gets the hobbits to Rivendell, with some help from Glorfindel, and once there he takes part in the Council of Elrond, where Aragorn catches the attention of a newcomer called Boromir. Now, Boromir only arrived in Rivendell the night before this council, and he came not because he's looking for allies or for weapons, but because he seeks answers to a riddle. A few months ago, both he and his brother Faramir received the same cryptic dream, and in that dream they heard a voice, remote but clear, crying the words, "Seek for the sword that was broken. In Imladris it dwells." Now, after Boromir says this at the council, Aragorn stands up and he reveals his broken sword for all to see. Then Elrond reveals his secret, his true identity as the heir of Isildur. For a moment, Boromir looks doubtful at the ranger, but he does admit the sword of Elendil would be, to Minas Tirith, a help beyond our hope. Aragorn then smiles at Boromir, reveals more about himself and his fellow Dunedain of the North, and then he ends with the words, "But now the world is changing. Isildur's bane is found. Battle is at hand. The sword shall be reforged. I will come to Minas Tirith." Long before anyone's decided what to do about the ring, Aragorn declares the broken sword shall be reforged and he will bear it to the City of Kings. That is Aragorn's quest. Now, the Council of Elrond does continue for quite some time after this, and Boromir does still have quite a bit more to say about Isildur's bane, but Aragorn, not so much. He's said his piece, he's made his decision. Right now, his duty has nothing to do with sneaking the ring into Mordor. Eventually, the Council of Elrond ends with Frodo announcing that he will bear the ring, and then with Samwise Gamgee jumping out and insisting on going too. But the rest of the Fellowship is not formed until the next chapter. Merry and Pippin also insist on going, despite Elrond's questioning if that's really such a good idea, and Gandalf volunteers to lead the company, recognizing that this shall be his great task, and maybe the end of his labours. Legolas and Gimli bring the number to 7, and representing the race of men, it is decided that Isildur's bane should be accompanied by Isildur's heir, Aragorn. When Frodo hears this, he's delighted, but also confused. He thought Aragorn was going to Minas Tirith with Boromir, to which Aragorn answers, "I am, and the sword that was broken shall be reforged ere I set out to war. But your road and our road lie together for many hundreds of miles. Therefore, Boromir shall also be in the company. He is a valiant man." And after that, the sword of Elendil is forged anew by the elven smiths, and Aragorn gives it a new name, Andúril, the Flame of the West. And only a few days after that, Aragorn and Andúril are journeying away together from Rivendell into the south, protecting the Ring-Bearer for as long as their roads lie together, but ultimately travelling not to Mordor, but towards Minas Tirith. In Moria, there is an epic moment where Aragorn and Boromir slay many orcs together in Balin's tomb, and Andúril cleaves the head of a huge orc chieftain with a flash-like flame. But, as you already know, shortly after that fight, Gandalf goes head-to-head with a Balrog, and ends up falling. The 9 walkers are down to 8. Their guide and guardian is gone. Now it's up to Aragorn to lead them onward. And this marks the first major departure from his plan. Prior to Gandalf's fall, everything was simple. Gandalf would go to Mordor with Frodo, Aragorn would go to Minas Tirith with Boromir, and the rest of the Fellowship would choose their own way nearer the time. But now Aragorn has to make a choice. Either take Gandalf's place, accompany the Ring-Bearer, and abandon his duty to the Dunedain, give up on his quest and betray his promise to Boromir, or else he has to abandon Frodo. After escaping from Moria, the Fellowship of course arrive in Lothlorien, and there they receive gifts from the Lady Galadriel and the Lord Celeborn, and Aragorn gets 2 gifts. First, he is given a custom-made sheath for his new sword Andúril, which bears in elven runes made of many gems the name Andúril, and the whole lineage of the sword. It's a stark reminder that the days of secrecy are over. And his second gift is the Elfstone, known in the Quenya language as the Elessar. The origins of the stone are mysterious, but we know that once upon a time, Galadriel gave it to her daughter Celebrian, and Celebrian gave it to her daughter Arwen Evenstar. At some unknown point, Arwen must have given it back to her grandmother, and when Galadriel regifts the stone to Aragorn, what she's doing is basically welcoming him into the bride's family, and reinforcing her son-in-law Elrond's words from all those years ago. A great doom does indeed lie on Aragorn, and one way or another, for good or for ill, the Third Age is gonna end with him, and with his sword. After leaving Lothlorien, the Fellowship take grey boats down the river Anduin, and Aragorn continues to grapple with his desperate choice. Should he go towards Mordor as a ranger, or towards Minas Tirith as Isildur's heir? But while Aragorn is struggling with what he ought to do, Boromir is also struggling, and beginning to lose faith in his friend's promise to come with him back to Gondor. Interestingly, in the books, Boromir doesn't really show any signs of wanting to take the ring for himself until after the Fellowship leaves Lothlorien. In fact, apart from at the Council of Elrond, Boromir never even mentions the ring until they are rowing down the Anduin, and finally nearing the point where every member of the Fellowship's gonna have to make their choice. Which brings him, for the first time, really, into significant conflict with his friend Aragorn, the guy who promised to return with him to Minas Tirith, but now seems to be looking eastward. Now, we all know what happens with Boromir and Frodo at Amon Hen, but whilst those two are having their confrontation, the other 6 members of the Fellowship have a discussion of their own about which way they're all gonna go from here. Everyone has an opinion, but Aragorn suggests the Fellowship should split into two. Frodo, Sam himself, and interestingly, Gimli, should all cross the river and head east into Mordor, whilst Boromir, Legolas, Merry, and Pippin should turn west and lend aid to Minas Tirith. But before this conversation has time to reach any kind of conclusion, Boromir returns to the Fellowship and reveals that Frodo's put on the ring and disappeared. Suddenly, panic and madness seize the Fellowship. The hobbits scatter and lose themselves in search of Frodo, and Legolas and Gimli run off after them. Aragorn tells Boromir to go after Merry and Pippin, and guard them at the least. Then he goes off after Sam, calling for Frodo. And, just in case this moment isn't already stressful enough, then a whole load of orcs attack. Aragorn hears the cry of their harsh voices, and then the deep-throated call of Boromir's horn. Aragorn charges through the trees, Andúril bright in his hand, but by the time he makes it to Boromir, he finds his friend struck down by many black-feathered arrows, with many dead orcs at his feet. With his dying words, Boromir tells Aragorn that he tried to take the ring from Frodo. He tells him that the orcs have taken the halflings, and he says, "Go to Minas Tirith and save my people. I have failed." Then Aragorn kisses his brow and says, "No, you have conquered. Be at peace. Minas Tirith shall not fall." Boromir smiles, and then he dies, leaving Aragorn with what may be the most impossibly difficult choice of his entire life. Should he honor Boromir's dying wish, fulfill the quest of Andúril as initially intended, but abandon the quest of the ring in the process, and abandon Merry and Pippin? Or should he go after Frodo, turning his back on the City of Kings and his duty as the heir of Isildur, as well as abandoning Merry and Pippin? Or should he turn aside from both paths, and instead do what he must to save his friends from torment and death? There is no good choice, and Aragorn has little time to make one. But after Boromir's funeral, he does arrive at his decision. The fate of the bearer is no longer in his hands. He will keep his promise to Boromir and take the sword to the City of Kings after he's rescued his friends. So, in pursuit of Merry and Pippin and the orcs who've captured them, Aragorn bears Andúril a really long way, really quickly, into the lands of Eastern Rohan. And, after 4 full days of running, he arrives within 35 miles of the eaves of Fangorn Forest. And there, Aragorn makes another friend. He meets a fellow future king, Éomer, son of Éomer. And when Éomer asks Aragorn who he is and what he's doing on the wide plains of Rohan, Aragorn introduces himself first as Strider of the North, but when Éomer asks whom he serves, Aragorn tells him the truth. He casts back his cloak, draws Andúril from its elven sheath, and says to Éomer, "I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, Elessar Elfstone Dúnedain, the heir of Isildur, Elendil's son in Gondor. Here is the sword that was broken and is forged again. Will you aid me?" Now, because Éomer is an epic character who's going to go on to have a stupendous friendship with Aragorn later in the story, he recognizes that dreams and legends are springing to life out of the grass before his eyes, and he appreciates that this legendary, mythical sword that was broken is going again to war. But there is a limit on how helpful Éomer's allowed to be in this moment. He says, "I am not free to do all as I would. It is against our law to let strangers wander at will in our land, until the king himself shall give them leave." But, luckily, there are 2 reasons why this doesn't turn into a problem. First, Eomer is thoroughly impressed with this wing-footed heir of Isildur carrying the reforged sword, and he recognizes that such a guy might be a valuable ally to the men of Rohan. And second, Eomer's concerns for what is or is not legal according to the laws of the king are questionable at best. I mean, the very reason he's even in Eastern Rohan meeting Aragorn at this moment is because he straight up disobeyed his king's command to not ride out and hunt the orcs crossing the land. Instead, he rode out and hunted the orcs crossing the land. And so, even though Eomer knows he's gonna be in a lot of trouble when he gets back to Edoras, and maybe returning with Aragorn might soften some of those consequences, instead he decides to break the king's law again and let Aragorn go. And it's not just even that, he also gives Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli a pair of his own horses so that he can aid them in the breaking of the king's law. And Eomer asks only one thing in return. When the quest to discover the fate of the halflings is complete, Aragorn must return the horses to Edoras to prove to King Theoden that Eomer did not make a mistake in trusting him. He says to Aragorn, "In this I place myself and maybe my very life." Aragorn promises he will not let Eomer down, and then Eomer and his Eored depart, and Aragorn rides off towards Fangorn Forest upon a horse of Rohan called Hasufel. Now, as you know, Aragorn does not find Merry and Pippin in that forest, but he does find Gandalf the White. And after a fascinating little reunion, Gandalf says to him, "The quest of your companions is over. Your next journey is marked by your given word. You must go to Edoras and seek out Theoden, for you are needed. The light of Andúril must now be uncovered in the battle for which it has so long waited. There is war in Rohan." So, once again, Aragorn must take a bit of a detour from his destiny. He is going to take the sword to the City of Kings, that's still the plan, but first, he's gotta go keep his promise to his new friend Eomer, and, ideally, save the Kingdom of Rohan in the process. Now, this is another one of those things that's quite different in the movies. Eomer isn't banished in the books, he's just imprisoned for a few days for disobeying the king. And when I say disobeying the king, of course, what I really mean is disobeying his counselor, Grima Wormtongue. Anyway, Aragorn takes Andúril to Edoras, and at the door of King Theoden's hall, he very reluctantly agrees to leave it outside. But he props it up against the wall himself, and he insists that no one touch the sword of Elendil until he returns. After that, he goes inside, and Gandalf does his thing. The wizard magically smacks down Grima Wormtongue and then rouses King Theoden, and then later that very same day, Aragorn rides with Andúril and the king and Eomer and his friends and many riders of Rohan to do war with Saruman. And one night later, Saruman's army attacks at Helm's Deep, and Andúril does battle openly, alongside Guthwina, the blade of Eomer, and Herogrim, the sword of King Theoden. After the battle, Aragorn then accompanies Theoden and Eomer and Gandalf to confront Saruman at Isengard, and when they get there, he and Legolas and Gimli are reunited with Merry and Pippin. And so, finally, all the other things that have prevented him from keeping his promise to Boromir at Amon Hen are now dealt with. There is now nothing to stop Aragorn riding to Gondor and returning the sword to the City of Kings. Except that on the return journey from Isengard back towards Helm's Deep, there are two major developments. First, Pippin looks into the Palantir, and he reveals himself to Sauron, and it becomes a whole big thing. Pippin and Gandalf speed away to Minas Tirith by the swiftest and straightest road, and the Palantir falls into the possession of the person most entitled to keep it, Aragorn. Then, the second development, the very next morning, Aragorn and the riders of Rohan encounter a company of 32 strangers on the road, 30 men and 2 elves. They call themselves the Grey Company, and they've ridden down from the north far and fast searching for their future king, for Aragorn. The 30 men are all Dunedain, rangers of the north, companions of Aragorn's, and they are led by a respected ranger called Halbarad. But among these rangers ride also the twin sons of Elrond, Elladan and Elrohir, the brothers of Arwen Evenstar, and close friends whom Aragorn grew up with. And they've come to Rohan with a message from their father and with a gift from their sister. The gift is a black banner, the standard of Elendil, that was made specifically for Aragorn by Arwen, a standard for him to unfurl in battle, to display as a symbol of his kingship. But it's the message from Elrond that really changes Aragorn's plan. Elrohir tells him, "The days are short. If thou art in haste, remember the paths of the dead." By the end of that night, Aragorn and everyone else who's travelling with him arrive back at Helm's Deep. Now, before the Grey Company showed up, the plan was that after returning from Isengard, the riders of Rohan would go to Dun Harrow, spend a few days mustering a much larger army there, and then, when all is ready, ride with Aragorn to Minas Tirith, following Gandalf's route along the swiftest road to bring reinforcements, along with a certain reforged sword, to the City of Kings. It's taken some time to get to this point, but it would seem now Aragorn's quest is really quite straightforward. Or at least it was, until the Grey Company showed up with that message, to remember the paths of the dead. Later that day, while everyone else is enjoying a well-deserved breather at Helm's Deep, Aragorn decides that the hour has come to reveal to Sauron that Isildur's heir yet lives, and that the sword that took him down the last time has been reforged, and that he is not so mighty yet as to be above fear. However, whilst looking into the Palantir and bending that stone to his will, Aragorn saw something else. Something, I imagine, Sauron really didn't want him to see. A whole fleet of black ships. Right now, as Aragorn is mastering the Palantir in Helm's Deep, the southern coastlands of Gondor are burning. Corsairs of Umbar are raiding Gondor's outlands and working their way upriver, first to Pelagir, and then eventually they will come to Minas Tirith, so that even if the City of Kings can endure a siege until the Riders of Rohan come, and even if the Riders of Rohan can defeat the armies of Mordor upon the fields of Pelennor, still Sauron is going to win. These black ships are going to ravage Gondor from within, and then they're going to arrive at the capital and turn the tide of battle and overwhelm the men of the West, ushering in total victory for the Dark Lord. And there's no one who can stop them. Except, maybe, Aragorn, with his reforged sword and his brand new standard of Elendil. So, Aragorn decides not to follow Gandalf and Pippin to Minas Tirith via the swiftest road. Instead, he will take the longer and harder road, the road to Pelagir, where black ships are a-sailing. And to get there from Helm's Deep, they must first take the haunted path through the mountains. They must walk the paths of the dead. So, Aragorn leads Legolas and Gimli and Elladan and Elrohir and the Grey Company along the Dimholt Road, through the Dark Door, and out the other side. At the Great Stone of Erech, he calls upon the King of the Dead and his Oathbreakers to fulfill their oaths and to ride with him to Pelagir. And, just like he did while chasing the Uruk-hai in pursuit of Merry and Pippin, Aragorn travels an enormously long distance incredibly quickly, and the dead ride with him, obedient to his will. As they pass through the Gondorian outlands of Larmadon and Lebanine, the men of these lands take notice, and there is one among them who has the courage not to flee at the coming of the King of the Dead. This guy is known as Angbor the Fearless, and Aragorn orders him to gather his warriors of Larmadon and many more fighting men of the surrounding outlands, and to bring them to Pelargir, where the heir of Isildur will have need of them. The next day, Aragorn and his army of Oathbreakers arrive at Pelargir, and they find the ancient Númenorian city already overrun by corsairs. 50 great ships of Umbar wait in the harbour, ready to set sail and to conquer the capital of Gondor. But at Pelargir, Aragorn unleashes the Oathbreakers, his army of the dead, and with their weapon of fear, the Shadow Host overwhelms the corsairs of Umbar and drives them from Pelargir entirely. Then Aragorn holds the dead men's oaths fulfilled, and he fills the black ships with his grey company and with the many freed men of the Gondorian outlands. And then he looks north. The City of Kings lies 120 miles upriver. But in this moment, it's under attack. About 35 hours later, the Battle of Pelennor Fields is raging outside its gates, and 3 hours into that battle, things are looking grim indeed for the Rohirrim. Theoden is dead, Éowyn is believed to be dead too, and reinforcements of Easterlings and Haradrim and Variags of Khand have joined the hosts of Mordor. Their mighty Mumakil are crushing many riders and their horses. The surviving men of Rohan look to their newly crowned king, Éomer, and when Éomer looks to the river, he loses all hope. Black ships have arrived, the final stroke. Éomer accepts that he is going to die, and that there will be no one left in the west to remember the last king of the Mark. But his mind is clear, and he laughs. For a battle fury is upon him, and he is still unscathed, and he is young, and he is king, lord of a fell people. As Éomer laughs in despair, he faces the black ships, and he lifts his sword Guthwina to defy them, and the lead ship unfurls its banner, and Andúril flashes in the sunlight. When Aragorn joins the battle, the tide is turned. Now it's the enemy who looks to the river in despair, and by the end of the day, the hosts of Mordor flee before the heir of Isildur and the king of Rohan and the army of the men of the west. And that's it, right? He's done it. Aragorn has brought the sword that was broken to the City of Kings. He's kept his promise to Boromir, he's completed his quest. All he has to do is take the sword inside the city and declare himself as Isildur's heir. But, fascinatingly, that's not what he does. After the Battle of Pelennor Fields, the acting Lord of Minas Tirith, Denethor's brother-in-law, Prince Imrahil, gives Aragorn permission to enter the city with the sword reforged, but Aragorn says no. He recognizes that Minas Tirith's now been ruled by stewards for almost 1,000 years, and he fears that with things the way they are, his appearance in the city with Elendil's sword might lead to all kinds of doubt and debate, which would end up only being helpful to Sauron. So Aragorn conceals his banner. He takes off his heirlooms, he unbuckles Andúril, and he leaves them in the temporary keeping of the sons of Elrond. Now, Aragorn does actually enter Minas Tirith at this point, but he does so only as a captain of the Rangers, hooded and cloaked, and wearing no token save for the elf stone that was gifted to him by Galadriel. And he goes only to the houses of healing, for the hands of a king are the hands of a healer. But when morning comes, Aragorn passes away, back to his sword and to his banner, outside of the city, and the people inside murmur, and rumours spread of the man who came and went like a dream, the Elfstone, whom in the Quenya language they call Elessar. In the next chapter, The Last Debate, Gandalf delivers arguably, I think, the best monologue in the entire story. It's so good. And in that debate, it's decided that though they cannot achieve victory by arms they can give the ring-bearer his only chance, frail though it be. They must offer themselves as bait, and walk open-eyed into that trap with courage, but with small hope for themselves. For it may well prove that we ourselves shall perish utterly in a black battle far from living lands, so that even if Barad-dûr be thrown down, we shall not live to see a new age. But this I deem is our duty, and better so than to perish nonetheless, as we surely shall if we sit here, and know as we die that no new age shall be. For a while, all are silent, but then Aragorn says, "As I have begun, so I must go on." Then he draws Andúril and holds it glittering in the sun, declaring, "It shall not be sheathed again until the last battle is fought." A few days later, Aragorn marches on Mordor, with his banner unfurled and Andúril unsheathed, and at the Black Gate he draws out Sauron's armies, and the last battle is fought. And because Mordor is emptied at Aragorn's challenge to make this battle happen, the Ring-bearer got safe passage across the Land of Shadow, and he makes it to the Crack of Doom, and the quest of the ring is accomplished. The men of the West are victorious, the Dark Tower crumbles, but the quest of the sword is not yet complete. It must still be brought into the city. And it actually takes 35 more days for this to happen. In that time, Frodo and Sam are healed by the hands of the king, victory is celebrated, and both the ring-bearers are honoured at the field of Cormallen, not far from where they first met Faramir only a few weeks ago. And then, on the first day of May, Aragorn and the hosts of the West finally return to the fields of Pelennor and to the gate of Minas Tirith. And before that gate they are met by a great crowd of the city's people. At the head of them stands Faramir, brother of Boromir, steward of Gondor, and he has with him the crown of the last king. He offers it to Aragorn, but Aragorn asks that the crown be given to Frodo, and that Frodo bear it to Gandalf, and that Gandalf place it upon his head. For in his own words, it is by the labour and valour of many that Aragorn has come in to this inheritance. And finally, then, with a crown on his head, King Elessar brings the sword that was broken through the gate and into the City of Kings. The chapter ends with Aragorn finding a sapling of the white tree and planting it where the dead tree used to stand, reports reaching the city that a great elvish company is approaching, and then, on Midsummer's Day, Arwen and Elrond and Galadriel and Celeborn and Glorfindel and many other elves arrive at Minas Tirith, and Arwen Evenstar is married to King Elessar, and their wedding is witnessed by a great many people of Rivendell and Lothlorien and Gondor and Rohan and the North. And after that, it's Aragorn's final chapter, Many Partings, in which he parts with the hobbits and the story leaves him behind. Aragorn's journey with Andúril, the quest of the sword, isn't accomplished until Aragorn's already crowned king. But it was the driving force of his characterization from the moment that he showed the broken blade to the ring-bearer back in Bree. That through line has been going from his second chapter all the way through to his second to last. And I really do think understanding this relationship between Aragorn and his sword is absolutely crucial in fully understanding Aragorn's character and his motivation to do what he does and his reason for mattering in the story. So, thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit like and leave a comment if you want to, and hit subscribe to make sure you don't miss any future videos coming soon. But until next time, as always, my dear friends, much love. Stay groovy and Nevair Melanin.